Welcome to WebGoat's A3 SQL Injection Intro. Our goal today is to understand the minimal basics of SQL and use this to understand the core of how SQL injection works. Before we get into the module, let's briefly cover some basic SQL and SQL interpreters. First, let's cover some of the core statements and clauses of SQL, and for this section, I'm going to have the table we're altering on the right side so you can see in real time what the statements are doing. Okay, so starting with select. A select statement takes either a set of defined columns or it can take a star representing all columns, and then uses the from clause to specify the table from which you're selecting the data. You can also use the where clause to specify a column and select only rows where the column that you specified matches the value that you specify. For example, in this statement I'm selecting the first name and last name columns from the users table where the user's first name is Jack. Now, let's move into update statements. You can use an update statement with a table name and then a set clause to set the value in the column you specify to the value you specify. This can be combined with a where clause to set that value only in the specified rows. For example, I can update the users table to set the last name equal to Smith for all users whose first name is Jack. The third statement we're going to explore is the delete statement. You can use this to delete rows from a specified table and then insert a where clause to specify which rows to delete. Note that if you don't specify a where clause, it will delete all rows from that table. Okay, so for example, I can delete all rows from the users table where the user's first name is not equal to Jack. Now let's touch on the insert statement. You can use insert to put data into a specified table where you specify the columns you're inserting and then use the values clause to specify the values for those columns. For example, I can insert a new user into the users table and then set the first name to John and the last name to Doe. Okay, now moving into SQL interpreters, let's talk about how user inputs from a website are inserted into a SQL statement. The server that a website interacts with will typically have a SQL statement saved into a variable as a string, and then it will have variables ready to accept the user inputs and insert them into the SQL statement. When you log into a website with a username and password, it sends these values to the server in an HTTP request. The server then saves these values into variables and puts the variables into the SQL statement created beforehand. Now let's look at what the where clause is doing. It's saying where username equals, and then opening a string, then concatenating the variable for username, and then closing the string. To imagine how SQL injection works, imagine what would happen if I put a single apostrophe as my username. This would cause the open string in the SQL statement to close prematurely and then open a new string that never gets closed, thus throwing an error. Now imagine what happens if I put this string as my username. And remember, the 2 dashes is a comment in SQL. This would close the string of the original SQL statement and allow me to run my own SQL statement. And since it is commenting out the rest of the pre-made statement, the string is never reopened, thus never producing an error. This is the basic level of how SQL injection works. Okay, so now that we understand kind of how SQL works, and how it's interpreted by the server, let's jump straight into the module. This first section is asking us to use a select statement to select the department column from all rows in the employees table where the first name is equal to Bob and the last name is equal to Franco. I'm not going to spend too much time on this or the next couple of sections, as we did just cover these concepts. Section 2 is just asking us to update the employees table and set the department equal to sales for all rows where the first name is Toby and the last name is Barnett. Section 3 is showing us the schema for the employees table and asking us to add a phone column. To do this, you can use the alter table statement, and then the employees table, then the add clause, and we're adding a column, and then you need the column name and the data type. So we'll put phone and then varchar20. Our whole statement should look like this, and once we submit it, it'll add a phone column to the employees table. The next section is explaining to us how rights to the tables are handled, and it's asking us to grant rights to the grant rights table to the user unauthorized user. To do this, we can use the grant statement, followed by which permission we're going to specify, and then you use the on clause and the table name you're targeting, and then the to clause on the user you're targeting. With the final statement that looks like this, the submission says congratulations. So now let's move into the actual injection section. Section 5 has drop-downs for you and shows you how an actual SQL injection statement works. We're going to close the string it gives us, and then we're going to say or the string 1 equals open apostrophe 1. This will lead to the second 1 being a string by itself. And since 1 as a string is always equal to 1 as a string, this is going to return every single row in the table. Now section 6 is where we begin to write our own SQL. It shows us the original statement and tells us to find the vulnerable field. Since user ID is at the end of the statement and is not a string, this is going to be our vulnerable field. So we can put 0 for login count, and then for user ID, we can put 0 or 1 equals 1. This is going to check either if the user ID equals 0 or if 1 equals 1. And since one of those statements is always true, it's going to return true for every single row. Next, we have section 7, which is going to ask us to get all rows from the employees table. First, we can copy and paste the tan into the tan field, and then for employee name, we can close the string and say or 1 equals 1, and comment out the rest of the statement. Again, since 1 is always equal to 1, this is going to return all rows. Now, moving into section 8, we can see that John Smith simply won't be happy until he's the highest paid employee in the company. So to set his salary as the highest number, we can close off the string like in the previous exercise, and then put a semicolon to end the statement. Now we can type our new statement, which is simply going to update the salary column for all rows where the first name is John. I'm going to set it to a really high value, and suddenly look at that. John's making almost $10 million a year. Alright, and then moving into the final section, we can see there's an access log table, which contains a history of any statement run by any user. So let's delete this table, because we don't need the company knowing we raised our own salary. To do this, we can first go through the hints to find the structure of the statement on the server. So let's start by closing the statement by inserting a % and then an apostrophe. Now end the statement with a semicolon, and now we can use the drop table statement to drop the access log table. Finish off by commenting out the rest of the line, and congratulations. So this is the basics of how SQL injection works. I hope you guys learned something in this, and I'll see you in the next one.